Dune Awakening is a survival MMO that we know very little about other than pretty intense cinematic trailers, and PC Gamer has an interview with some of the first bits of information, and I thought I would walk through it with you and kind of react. This is a game that many people are looking forward to. It's also one that people think might not work that well with the setting being pretty typically just lots of sand. So I wanted to look at this with you guys and sort of react and say what I think. So we got spice, worms, and water. First, details on survival systems in the upcoming Dune MMO. Dune Awakening will focus on a few tight core survival mechanics like shelter, traversal, and water, says creative director Joel Bylos. If you're not familiar with survival games, they typically mean you're like maintaining things like food and shelter and not dying and staying warm. So I'm going to skip the first paragraph because I think it's just kind of like sort of a fluff intro. We want to get into the meat of this. Last week, I spoke with Joel Bylos, creative director for upcoming world survival MMO Dune Awakening. We first saw the cinematic trailer last year, giving us a quick glimpse at Funcom's MMO based on the Dune novels by Frank Herbert and the 2021 film and planned 2023 sequel, which is set on a vast, seamless Arrakis that will be shared by thousands of players. Now, many people sort of immediately said, this isn't going to be a great setting for a survival MMO. It's just sand, and more sand. Like, what are you going to do? How are you going to have, diversity and biomes and things of that nature? And I don't know if that question gets answered in this interview, but I do think that's a fair question to ask. So, I'm not a big MMO player, neither am I, but I've played plenty of survival games, so I was curious just how deep and intricate Dune Awakening survival systems are. We already know from the books and the films that staying alive on the desert planet of Arrakis is extremely challenging, considering the deadly heat, the fact that everyone has to wear a still suit to recycle their body's moisture, and of course, those darn sandworms popping out of the ground to devour anyone who takes a false step on the sand. They do show one of those in the cinematic trailer. I think that's sort of hinting at the fact that you're going to have to sort of be on guard, maybe even fight them. Who knows? Here's a quote from Bylos. We're very focused on a few tight core survival mechanics like shelter, sandstorm shelter. Sandworms themselves are a giant threat in the world. If you walk on sand, they will come. If you create vibrations, they will come. So you have to think about how you approach traversal in the game world. And obviously, water. Those are three key systems. So it sounds like obviously you're going to need shelter to, protect yourself from everything. But the reason that they've included traversal is that it's the most basic forms of traversal is going to bring a pretty ominous and terrible threat. And you have to think about, water as well, because you're in a desert. That one's kind of a given. Spice is power. Those aren't the only threats in the world of Dune. There are hazards like quicksand and the extreme temperatures of the desert that Funcom wants players to have to consider and prepare for, but not be overly punished by. We want players to feel these tensions all the time, Bylos said. We want them to be continually thinking about, if I'm going to cross the open sand, I have to think about the sandworms. If there's a sandstorm coming, I have to know where there's shelter nearby. If I haven't built something, I need to know where I can hide and where I can get away from these sandstorms. So we're trying to create this tension, but we're also approaching it from the viewpoint of a little more accessibility, something like Valheim, where it's not like just going to kill you instantly, so you have a little bit of leeway. That is something that survival games are known for. They can just sort of drop you in the game and they don't explain anything, and you die, and you die, and you die, and then you die some more, and then eventually you figure out how to find a stick, and then you use that stick to make a fire, and then you don't die, and then you sort of build up from there. Recently, I was trying out No Man's Sky VR, and if you don't start like a fresh save, if you just jump into the expedition, they skip some of the basic controls, and they dropped me off in water, and I just kept drowning. And it was funny, but that is sort of an example of how survival games can go. And it sounds like they're thinking about that. They don't want you to sort of be just dying immediately. They want you to be able to enjoy it, which I think is an admirable approach to a survival game. You want more people to get in. Valheim successfully did a few things, as Fraser put it, to reject boring survival systems and make them more appealing for players who don't typically play survival games. Food, for instance, you'll never starve to death from not eating. While food remains a deeply important part of Valheim for maintaining your health and stamina, you can get by while neglecting it. That's sort of the idea that Funcom is going to with its survival systems in Dune Awakening. Here's the quote. "There are assumptions that have just been there since the start of the survival genre because the first survival game did them, and everybody else sort of copied that, so we're rethinking some of those paradigms. And so I would say that we want to create these very strong survival tensions, but we also don't want to punish players in a ridiculously harsh way, so we're kind of trying to find a nice balance with that." This happens in Rogues. This happens in Souls-like games. They take inspiration, but they don't need to follow the rules of the first games or the earlier games with some sense of rigidity. I think that's probably a good word for people that see survival and think, oh gosh, I'm going to be dying the whole time because I can't find berries or a pool of water to drink from. Sounds like they're going to give you tension and motivations to take care of it, but they're not going to be brutal and punishing in the execution. While water is key to life on Arrakis, Bilo said spice's power. At the start of the game, players have no strong affiliation to spice, but over time, it will begin to permeate their bloodstream, which will allow them to enhance their abilities and learn new skills. In some ways, spice sounds like Valheim's food system, something important to the game, but not deadly if neglected. Here's the quote. "So you want to stay above certain spice levels to keep learning abilities. You might want to stay above a certain level to make sure that you have 100% of your maximum health at all time. We're not trying to punish the player by killing them if they don't take spice for a while, but we're trying to give them good reasons to maintain their spice levels." So spice is sort of in this paradigm. I don't necessarily know if water's going to be in that paradigm. Like, hey, it's not a big deal if you don't have water. I think that would sort of be ridiculous. But typically in survival games, the base level things that you need are around. They just need to be sort of maintained. You kind of have to babysit it. It's part of the fun. It's part of the appeal. That might not be appealing to you, but that is part of the appeal of a survival game. Sandcrafts. Crafting is another big part of the survival genre, and Bilos explained how crafting will vary from how it works in another Funcom multiplayer survival game, Conan Exiles. In Conan Exiles, you had a tech tree, and as you leveled up your character, you would spend points in the tech tree, and that's kind of the traditional Ark and Conan style of things. In Dune Awakening, you're actually going out and looking for specific schematics that you can use to craft specific items. For example, if you have information that a botanical testing station somewhere in the desert was experimenting with a certain kind of technology, you'll head out there to find the schematic. So the crafting is a little more bespoke, a little less tech tree driven, and a little more exploration driven. That actually sounds kind of cool. That sounds more organic, more emergent, sort of taking clues, going out and finding things, instead of just going into your skill tree and spending points. That sounds similar to some of the ways they've done it in No Man's Sky traditionally. You could just sort of explore for a long time and just find random schematics. I think they've streamlined that more a little bit now. You can go to the little centers and like spend points. You can kind of gather that currency to focus specifically on things you want to build. But in early iterations of No Man's Sky, you would sort of venture out to find things. It wasn't as direct as this. I don't think they would like tell you. I think sometimes there were clues, but this sounds a little bit more clue-driven than the No Man's Sky stuff that I experienced in the early iterations of No Man's Sky. It's not like that anymore. Spice harvesting is obviously going to play a major part in the player-driven economy, but crafting will be a path to player success too. The dangerous sandstorms of Arrakis aren't just a threat to players, but an opportunity. There is a pillar of the game that we call infinite exploration, and the idea is that outside of the shield wall, the sands actually shift during these Coriolis storms, and the entire map outside of that space changes. So as the storm buries existing locations like testing stations or crashed spaceships, it will also reveal new ones. If you're the first player to visit one of these new locations, you might be the first to find a schematic no one else has found yet. This is one of the things I remember from one of the earlier interviews that sounds so cool to me. The fact that the world will change shape day to day and, in these cycles. I think that's awesome. Now, I don't know if they see that as something limitless. They're saying infinite exploration. I wonder if that's genuinely true. I also wonder if they're going to be using procedural generation to achieve this. Like, is the world never going to have truly static locations that give it this true survival desert planet sense that they're going for? And it's a schematic for a type of gun that nobody knows how to make. So you take it back, and you're the person who has that schematic. And then you can craft those guns and sell them on the exchange, and you're the only one who can craft them until the next time somebody finds that schematic. But that might not be for the next storm cycle. That's extremely cool that you can have that sort of feeling of, oh, I got this, nobody else has it. It creates value in the economy. Player-driven economies are very sensitive, so I'll be interested to see if they can maintain this one. Typically, people find out ways to sort of skirt around things or like cheat or exploit, so I'll be interested to see how that one pans out. There's still no announced release date for Dune Awakening, but the second chapter of the new Dune film series is due out this year, and we wouldn't be surprised if the MMO released at around the same time as the movie. In the meantime, you can sign up for beta access on the official website. So I will say that all of that sounds very promising. Number one, they're sort of scaling back the intensity of the survival elements. The world itself has really cool mechanics, how it's going to be sort of changing. Interested to see if it's going to be reverting back to certain states, like every so many storm cycles, will a building become visible again, or are they going to go with procedural generation or something sort of random? More information hopefully coming out about this game. Keep it here for reaction videos like this as well as live streams. Hit subscribe and the bell button on this video, and I'll see you in the next one.